She laughed when I said I wanted to open a business. Laughed, loud and open-mouthed, like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. "Agnes," she said, patting my arm like I was a silly child. "You sew buttons. That's not a business, dear. That's a hobby." I remember how her bracelets clinked when she flicked her hand. She always wore too many. That was over 30 years ago, and yet today she walked into my shop with a tight smile and a file folder in her hands, asking if I had a job for her, as if the words she'd once used hadn't sat lodged in my chest all this time. The air was dry that morning. November tends to do that in Westbridge. Crisp leaves gathered along the edge of the sidewalk, and the heater in my sewing studio had started to make that clicking noise again before kicking in. I was hemming a pair of trousers for Mr. Langdon, same man who used to sit behind Clara Jenkins in church and whisper that she wore too much perfume. Funny how things come full circle. She stood in the doorway like she didn't quite believe she was here. The same Clara, hair now more silver than blonde, lipstick a little too bright for her lined face. But still Clara. Same posture, same high chin. "Agnes," she said, as if testing the weight of my name. "You look well." I didn't get up. My back was stiff that morning, and I didn't see the point. "I do fine," I said, threading the needle. "You need something altered?" She hesitated. Her hands clutched that folder like it might run away. "Actually, I was wondering if you had any positions open. I've been applying all over town. Just something part-time. Front desk, maybe." I nodded slowly, setting the needle down. I wanted to say, "You mean after all these years, after all your jokes, after pretending I was invisible at every community fundraiser, we're just going to skip past that?" But I didn't. Not yet. I looked around my shop. It's not big, never was. But it's mine. One long counter, a row of machines, spools of thread in every color on a pegboard, the smell of starch and fabric softener, a picture of my daughter on the back wall, Sarah in her nurse's uniform, smiling with the kind of face that made people want to talk to her. I built this place stitch by stitch. Every piece of it came from me and no one else. Clara followed my gaze, pretending not to notice the photo. "You've really built something here," she said, and her voice had a crack in it, just faint. I nodded. "I did." She didn't sit down, just kept standing there, like she didn't quite know how to be in a place where she wasn't in charge. "It's not easy these days," she said. "After Harold passed, I thought there'd be more security. But the shop, his shop, it went under last year. The leases? You know how it is." I knew. Everyone in Westbridge knew. After Harold's heart gave out, Clara had tried to keep the hardware store running, but she didn't know what she was doing. People stopped coming. Then the lights went out. The for lease sign went up 2 months later. I didn't gloat. I never do. But I noticed. She cleared her throat. "Anyway, I'm trying to find something, and I thought, maybe we could start fresh." Start fresh. Like I hadn't spent years being the butt of her jokes at the hair salon. Like she hadn't once told my daughter to her face, "Your mother should just stick to mending sleeves. She's not cut out for much else." Sarah cried that night. I remember brushing her hair and saying, "Some people just talk to feel big. That don't make them right." And now Clara stood in front of me, clutching her folder, in my business. The one she said would never make it. I leaned back in my chair. The sun was coming through the window at just the right angle, lighting up the dust in the air like golden specks. I thought about what to say. Not something cruel. "I'm not built that way." But something real. Before I could speak, the door creaked behind her, and Ruby came in, my part-time help, 22, pink braids, sharp as a tack. She saw Clara and nodded politely, then looked at me. "Finish the dry clean tags, Agnes. Anything else?" "Not for now, honey," I said. Then I looked back at Clara. "I'll need to think about it." She blinked. Maybe she thought I'd leap at the chance to hire her. Maybe she thought I was still that scared little woman stitching aprons at midnight. "Of course," she said quickly, backing toward the door. "Take your time." When the door closed behind her, Ruby raised an eyebrow. "Was that the Clara Jenkins?" "Yes," I said, picking up the needle again. She whistled low. "Didn't she once call you a thread rat at the town meeting?" "She did." "And she's here for a job?" I nodded again. Ruby leaned on the counter, watching me with a smile curling in the corner of her mouth. "Well, damn, Agnes. Who's laughing now?" When I was 38, I came home from the grocery store to find a letter from the electric company taped to my door. "Final notice," it said in red letters. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the paper. My husband had been gone 2 years by then. The factory had cut my hours, and Sarah was still in high school. I remember sitting at the kitchen table staring at that bill and thinking, so this is what falling apart feels like. That night, I told myself I'd never let it happen again. I started taking in mending from the neighbors, loose hems, torn sleeves, zippers that needed coaxing. At first, people just paid me in pies or old clothes they didn't want anymore. It wasn't much, but I liked the feeling of being useful. One evening, while fixing a dress for Mrs. Grant, I mentioned that maybe I'd open a little shop someday. She smiled kindly, but said, "Oh, Agnes, shops cost money." Word got around faster than I expected. By Sunday, Clara knew. She always knew everything first. I ran into her after church, still in my good skirt, when she stopped me near the steps. "A shop, really?" she said, loud enough for the pastor's wife to hear. "You'd need a miracle, dear. Or a husband with money." The laughter that followed sounded like nails scratching on glass. I smiled the way people do when they're bleeding inside. That night, I took out my old sewing machine from the attic. It had belonged to my mother, the only thing I had left of hers. I oiled it, cleaned the gears, and sat at the table until midnight, sewing an old bedsheet into aprons. The hum of the needle felt like a heartbeat that wasn't giving up. Sarah came out in her pajamas and rubbed her eyes. "You're not sleeping again?" "I'm planning," I said. "Every business starts with a plan." She looked skeptical. "What kind of business?" "One where I'm the boss for once." We both laughed, but I meant it. I started small. Flyers printed on the library copier. Alterations and mending by Mrs. Harper. Fast, fair, reliable. I slipped them under doors, pinned them on bulletin boards, left them at the post office. My first real customer was a teacher named Mrs. Wallace, who brought me her husband's trousers. She paid in cash and said, "You should charge more." That sentence felt like oxygen. But Clara wasn't done. She told people I was doing it because I was lonely. "Poor Agnes," she said once in the grocery aisle, "still chasing pennies with a needle." I pretended not to hear, but every word stung. There's a certain kind of cruelty that comes from people who've never been scared. The worst part was the day at the bank. I'd gone to apply for a small loan to rent a corner space near the pharmacy. The loan officer, a young man who kept calling me ma'am, flipped through my forms and said politely, "You have no collateral." I remember nodding, folding the papers carefully, thanking him for his time, then walking outside before the tears started. On the steps, I saw Clara getting into her husband's car. She looked right at me, smiled sweetly, and rolled down the window. Didn't work out, huh? Well, some of us are just meant for simpler things. That night, I couldn't eat. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I sat by the window, staring at the dark street. A single thought kept looping through my head. She thinks she's right. The next morning, I took the last $100 from the coffee tin under the sink and bought extra fabric, needles, and thread. I turned my living room into a workspace, cleared off the dining table, and hung a sign in the window. Sewing and repairs. Ring bell. For weeks, no one came. Then one day, a teenage boy showed up holding a torn jacket. "Mom said you could fix this," he mumbled. I patched it neatly and refused his dollar bill. "Tell your mom thank you." The next day, she came herself with 2 more jackets. By the end of that month, I had 10 regular clients. Every night, I'd sit at the table, my fingers sore, the old lamp flickering, and I'd whisper to the empty room, "You see, Harold? I'm doing it." Sometimes on my way to the post office, I'd pass Clara outside her husband's store. She'd wave from behind the window, polished and proper, and I'd wave back. But inside, I was thinking, someday you'll know what it feels like to build something from nothing. Years later, I can still hear the sound of her laughter that day on the church steps, the laughter that built the walls I had to climb. What she never understood was that humiliation can be a better teacher than encouragement. It burns longer, keeps you awake. It sews its own kind of thread, the kind that doesn't break. The morning I found out Sarah had been skipping lunch to save her pocket money, I cried into a dish rag so she wouldn't see me. She was 16 and stubborn like her father used to be, quiet about pain, proud about struggle. I opened her backpack to slip in a folded sweater and found the brown paper bags she'd brought back uneaten. She hadn't told me because she knew we were behind on the mortgage and didn't want to be one more burden. That was the moment I stopped hoping someone would come to save us. There would be no magic inheritance, no kind benefactor. Just me and a pair of tired hands. I found a way to stretch the business further. I started going door to door again, but this time with a basket of examples, neatly stitched pillowcases, children's patches, a blouse I'd reworked from a worn-out dress. People responded to that. They liked to see what they were paying for. Mr. Colburn, from down on Pine Street, offered to put a small notice in the church bulletin. I took in uniforms, scout sashes, communion dresses. Bit by bit, I was sewing us back into safety. One day at the pharmacy, I overheard Clara talking to her friend Ruth. "Honestly," she said, "it's admirable how long Agnes is keeping up this little project. But still, people like us, we don't need to work ourselves to the bone like that. People like us. She always did speak in categories. There were people like her, middle class, well-married, properly dressed, and then there were the rest of us." I didn't say anything. I paid for my shampoo and my daughter's asthma inhaler, and I left. That winter, snow came early and stayed. The sidewalks were icy, the sky gray for weeks on end. I remember thinking how tired I was, how the cold made my knuckles ache, and the drafts in our little kitchen whistled louder than usual. But the work kept coming. A turning point came with the high school. They were putting on a musical, and the art teacher, Ms. Brenner, came looking for someone to alter costumes. "You come highly recommended," she said, her breath fogging up her glasses. "The old place in town charges too much." I said yes before she could change her mind. There were 14 costumes to fix, skirts to shorten, sleeves to sew, sequins to reattach. I worked late every night for a week, hands blistered from fabric glue, back stiff from sitting. Sarah helped with pinning hems, and we laughed more than we had in months. The night of the performance, I sat in the back row with tears in my eyes, watching the girls twirl in dresses I had rescued from mothballs. I felt proud, not flashy, not triumphant, just solid, like the ground under your feet when the wind finally stops. After that, things changed. Word got around. More teachers came. Then the dance school. Then the dry cleaner who hated alterations and started referring people to me. Clara heard, of course. She always did. One afternoon, she passed me on Main Street, wearing her fox fur collar like she always did when she wanted to feel important. "You've become quite the little entrepreneur," she said, as if it was charming. I smiled and said nothing. But inside I thought, "No, Clara. I became something you never thought possible." She wasn't cruel anymore, not directly. But condescension can be a quiet thing, a smile with corners too sharp. "You know," she said once at a PTA meeting, "Agnes here is very clever. She's made an entire career out of sewing other people's mistakes." The room laughed politely. I did too, but only with my mouth. When I got home, Sarah asked, "Why do you let her say things like that?" "Because," I said, "sometimes silence is stronger than answers." But it wasn't always easy to stay quiet. When the bank finally approved me for a small business account, I cried again, this time in the parking lot. Not because I was sad, but because someone finally said yes. Not to charity, not to pity, to possibility. I rented a space down near the corner, where the old bakery used to be. It was small, a little dusty, and the plumbing rattled, but it had a window. I painted the door myself, put up a sign I carved from pine. Agnes's alterations. No frills, just truth. The first week I had 3 clients, then 7, then 20. Clara didn't come by, but she walked past once and peeked in. I saw her. Her reflection caught in the glass. She lingered a little too long, then walked away. Her perfume stayed in the air after she left. Sweet, sharp, familiar. I didn't follow her. I went back to the sewing table. One hem at a time, one stitch at a time, I was proving her wrong without ever having to say a word. The space smelled like paint and old linoleum. I remember standing in the middle of it that first morning with the key still warm in my hand, feeling something between fear and reverence. It was just one room, barely wider than my old living room, with a back closet that still had a faded mop bucket in it. The front window was smudged with fingerprints and sun-bleached around the edges. But it was mine. I'd brought in my mother's sewing machine, the same one I'd used for years. I didn't replace it, even though newer models had more buttons and shone like spaceships. That old singer had seen me through everything. Sarah's school uniforms, a dozen rent crises, and more silent nights than I could count. I gave it a home on the wide wooden table by the window. I hung thread racks along the wall, neatly ordered by color. Every spool looked like a small promise. That first week was slow. I sat behind the counter drinking instant coffee from a chipped mug and trying not to worry. I'd told Sarah not to get her hopes up. "We'll see how it goes," I said. "Even if it doesn't work out, I'll at least have tried." She hugged me tight. "You always say that, Mom. But you make things work." "You always have." Clients came slowly at first. A woman with a tear in her wedding dress from 30 years ago. A young man whose interview suit didn't fit right. A mother whose toddler had grown out of everything overnight. I greeted each one the same way, with respect, with attention, and with care. I knew how hard it was to ask for help. I never made them feel small. On the fourth day, I looked up and saw Clara walk past the window. She didn't come in, but her eyes caught mine through the glass. Her mouth twitched like she'd tasted something bitter. She was still in her good coat, the one with the black velvet trim, and her heels clicked confidently on the sidewalk. But her expression was different now. Not disdain, exactly. Something closer to doubt. I didn't flinch. I just nodded slightly and went back to the pair of slacks I was hemming. Business picked up faster than I expected. A teacher from the school brought 3 choir robes that needed resizing. Then the manager at the bakery asked if I could mend aprons. Then came the bridesmaids, all with mismatched dresses and panic in their eyes. I became a quiet part of people's milestones, their job interviews, their weddings, their first days at school. I sowed joy and panic and hope into every hemline. Sometimes I worked until midnight. My hands would ache and my eyes would blur, but I didn't stop. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because every stitch felt like something I was reclaiming. Not just money, but pride. On Saturdays, Sarah would come by with lunch and sit with me for an hour. She'd bring soup in thermoses and tell me about her patients at the hospital. I'd listen, smiling, watching how strong she'd grown. All the things Clara once said I couldn't be. I'd managed to become, and I'd raised a daughter who could go even further. One evening, as I was closing up, I heard a knock on the glass. I turned, and there was Ruth, Clara's friend, the one who used to laugh along with her at every jab thrown my way. She looked sheepish. "Agnes," she said, "I'm sorry to bother you, but could you take a look at this?" She held out a silk scarf, torn clean through. I let her in, took the scarf gently, and examined the edges. "I can fix it," I said simply. She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath all day. "Thank you." I didn't know who else to ask. There was a pause. Then she added, "Clara said you'd opened a place." She didn't mention how lovely it is. I smiled, just a little. Some things don't need to be mentioned. They just speak for themselves. Ruth chuckled softly and left her name and number on a slip of paper. As she turned to leave, she hesitated. "You know, she sees it too, even if she doesn't say so." I didn't answer, because I didn't need her to say it. I didn't need her apology. What I had now couldn't be undone by a few sour memories. My shop was warm, full of fabric and motion and life. It smelled of starch and lavender and hard work. Some nights, I stood alone by the window after locking up, watching the streetlights blink on, one by one. I used to think about Harold then, and what he'd say if he could see me. Maybe he'd laugh and shake his head, amazed at how I'd gotten here. Or maybe he'd just say what he used to say when I doubted myself. "You've got more grit than you know, Aggie." He'd be right. And somewhere in that thought, in that quiet, I started believing it too. It was during the second spring in the shop when the school principal, Mr. Hammond, walked in with a suit in one hand and a sheepish look on his face. "I ripped the sleeve," he said, "right before the district meeting. You came highly recommended." I looked at the tear, clean along the seam. "I can fix it," I said, as I always did. "You always this calm?" he asked, pulling out his wallet. "Calm keeps the thread straight," I answered, and he laughed like I'd told him a joke. That was how it kept going, one client at a time. No marketing campaigns, no flashing lights. Just trust. I became the person people came to when things fell apart. Literally. There was something sacred about that, even if they never said so. Somewhere in that third year, I hired Ruby. She was fresh out of high school, didn't know a bobbin from a buttonhole, but she was bright, fast, and kind to customers. She wore her hair in bright colors and once showed up with eyebrows dyed green. "Fashion's a conversation," she told me. I didn't argue. I liked her spirit. She reminded me of Sarah at that age, sharp but full of questions. And she had good instincts. Within a month, she was handling the register and steaming fabric like she'd been born to it. Customers loved her, and I loved that someone young was learning how to earn honestly with their hands. One afternoon, we were closing early after a long day of prom fittings when Ruby asked, "Did you always want to run a business?" I folded a lace gown into a garment bag and thought for a moment. "No," I said. "I just didn't want to drown." She looked at me, waiting for more, but I left it there. Because sometimes that's all there is. People think success is born from dreams. For some of us, it's born from necessity. From bills that don't wait. From kids who need shoes. From standing in your kitchen and knowing that no one's coming to help. Clara came in that spring. Not officially. She claimed she was just passing by and wanted to see what all the fuss was about. She stood by the door, looking around with that tight-lipped expression she used when she couldn't decide whether to compliment or criticize. "It's bigger than I expected," she said. "It does the job," I replied, without looking up from the counter. "I hear you've got quite the client list." "I stay busy." There was a pause. She touched a bolt of fabric and rubbed it between her fingers like she knew what she was doing. She didn't. Her nails were too polished for thread. Too clean. "Well," she said after a beat, "good for you." That was the closest she'd ever come to admitting I'd proved her wrong. I didn't need more, not from her. After she left, Ruby whispered, "That's the woman who laughed at you?" I nodded. "She looks like she swallowed a lemon." I smiled. "That's called living long enough to watch people change their tune." And they did. People who once ignored me now asked if I'd consider speaking at luncheons, mentoring youth programs, donating a dress to charity raffles. I said yes when I could, but I never forgot. Not to hold a grudge, just to remember who I was when no one believed in me. One afternoon, I was invited to the Chamber of Commerce's small business panel. It felt surreal sitting at a table next to men in suits with Bluetooth earpieces and printed brochures. When they introduced me, they called me a local success story built from grit and grace. I smiled and nodded. But inside, I thought, built from desperation and late nights and hands that never gave up. After the panel, a woman approached me, maybe in her 40s, with 2 teenagers hovering behind her. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "My daughter brought in a dress last fall, and you saved it. She still talks about how kind you were." I looked at the girl, quiet, shy, eyes down. I reached out and touched her arm gently. "You looked beautiful in it. I remember." She smiled, just barely, but enough. That's what the shop had become, not just a place for repairs, but for reassurance, for telling people in quiet ways that they were seen and worthy and capable. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it was steady, like me. That night, I locked up the shop, stood on the sidewalk and looked at the sign. The wood was faded now, the paint chipped in places, but the letters were still clear. Agnes's Alterations. Not bad for a woman who was told she wasn't cut out for much more than threading needles in her kitchen. Not bad at all. The summer my rent went up, I didn't panic. I just adjusted. Cut back on extras, picked up 2 more clients a week, and stayed open later on Thursdays. When you've spent a life stretching pennies, you learn how to make discomfort feel like routine. I didn't complain to anyone. Not to Sarah, not to Ruby. It wasn't their burden. I started walking to the shop instead of taking the bus. 40 minutes each way, past the same elm trees, the same uneven sidewalk cracks I used to push Sarah's stroller over. Sometimes I passed the old hardware store, boarded up now, its sign faded and half broken. Clara's store. She'd shut it down 2 years after Harold died. People said she tried to run it herself, but she didn't know stock from shelving and didn't want to be seen hauling inventory in heels. She hired a manager, but he stole from the register. Then a cousin helped out, until he stopped showing up altogether. It crumbled slowly, like a house eaten from the inside. I never commented. When folks at church whispered about it, I stayed quiet. Not because I felt pity, because I knew what it was like to lose something you thought would hold. Clara stayed in town, though. Sold her husband's car, downsized to a 2-bedroom apartment behind the bakery. I'd see her sometimes at the market, comparing coupons like the rest of us. Her pearls were gone. Her lipstick a little thinner. One day, she stopped me by the produce section. "Agnes," she said, touching my arm lightly. "You still have that shop?" "I do." "That's good." She looked down at the apples, picked one up, then set it back. "I was thinking, maybe we could catch up sometime." It was the first time she'd spoken to me without layering her words in sugar or superiority. I nodded. Maybe. But I didn't mean it. Some things, you don't owe people. That September, Ruby's younger cousin came to town, needed a part-time job. I didn't have the money to hire anyone else, but I let her come in on Saturdays to shadow Ruby. "Just learn for now," I told her. "If you're serious, we'll talk." She was quiet, polite. Didn't ask for much, but she reminded me how many girls like her never get shown how to work with their hands. Everything's digital now, fast, disposable. No one teaches care anymore. I liked that she wanted to learn. One Saturday afternoon, while I was showing her how to adjust a collar seam, the front bell jingled. I looked up and saw Clara standing in the doorway. But this time, she wasn't just stopping by. She was holding a manila folder and a brown handbag that looked heavier than usual. Her clothes were pressed, but tired. Her shoes practical. I knew that look. It was the look of someone trying not to look desperate. "Agnes," she said, "do you have a moment?" I told Ruby to take her cousin for an early lunch. When they left, Clara stepped closer and set the folder on the counter. "I won't take much of your time. I've been looking for work, part-time, temporary, anything really, and I thought, maybe." She trailed off. Her voice didn't shake, but her hands did. I opened the folder. A resume printed on clean paper, neatly organized. Work experience listed mostly in Harold's shop. Volunteer work. A line about managing household finances. No references. I looked at her. Really looked. Clara Jenkins. The woman who once said I didn't belong at the women's auxiliary. The woman who told Ruth I was a sweet little workhorse with no ambition. The woman who laughed when I said I'd try. And now she was here, at my counter, asking me for a job. "I see," I said, closing the folder gently. "I can answer phones. Keep the place tidy. Maybe help with simple mending. I know I'm not trained, but I'm a quick learner." Her voice was even, her back straight. But her eyes were dimmer than I remembered. "I appreciate your honesty," I said. She exhaled, and for a second, I saw relief. But I wasn't done. I needed to sit with what this meant. Not just for her, but for me. So I told her the truth. "I'll think about it. Come back next week and we'll talk." She nodded quickly, as if afraid the offer might vanish. "Thank you, Agnes. Truly. Thank you." After she left, I stood in the silence of the shop, holding the folder, the weight of her words settling like dust on fabric. She'd come to me. After everything. And somehow I didn't feel triumphant. Just still. Because it wasn't revenge I'd been building all these years. It was a life. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because I was upset, but because something inside me was shifting. Quietly. Like a chair being dragged across the floor. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, remembering all the times Clara's voice had cut through rooms like a knife, sharp, dismissive, certain. And now that same voice had asked me for help. It would have been easier if she'd begged, or if she'd looked humiliated. But she hadn't. She'd been composed, polite, almost careful. Like she knew what she'd done to me, and also knew I hadn't forgotten. Ruby noticed the next morning. She always did. "You're folding pins like they insulted you," she said, watching me jam them back into the little cushion. I smiled. "Just thinking." "About yesterday?" I nodded. "You gonna take her on?" I said I'd think about it. Ruby leaned against the counter. "You don't owe her anything, you know." "I know." But that wasn't the real question. The real question was, did I owe it to myself to say no? When Harold was alive, Clara used to host garden parties every spring, big ones, pastel tablecloths, lemonade in glass pitchers, finger sandwiches lined up like soldiers. I'd been invited once in the early days, before Sarah was born. I wore a blue dress and brought potato salad in my best dish. I remember standing on her back porch, listening to Clara laugh with the other wives. They all had the same smiles, tight, white, a little bored. I tried to join the conversation, something about summer reading clubs, but Clara talked over me, shifting the topic back to something more relatable. Later, she told me with a smile, "Don't worry, dear. Not everyone's made for hosting." I stopped going to her parties after that. It wasn't just one moment. It was 100, 1,000. Every time she handed me a compliment shaped like a barb, every time she reminded me, softly, sweetly, that I was lucky to be included at all. And yet, here we were. She came back the next Friday, exactly on time. Same coat, same folder, but her hair was pinned neater, and she'd added a brooch at her collar. Something about her posture felt rehearsed. I had Ruby run an errand so we could speak alone. "Agnes," Clara said, "thank you for seeing me again." I nodded. "Tell me why you want this job." Her eyes widened just a little, as if she hadn't expected the question. Then she sat straighter. "I need the work. And the truth is, I'm good at organizing. I can answer phones, manage appointments. I've helped run a store, managed books. I know how to keep things orderly." I watched her carefully. "And do you know how to take direction?" There was a beat of silence, the kind that hangs heavy. "Yes," she said finally. "I do." I stood there for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, you can start next Tuesday. 2 mornings a week. Trial basis. We'll see how it goes." She blinked. Once, twice. "Thank you. Really. I pay hourly," I added. "Same as Ruby started at. No exceptions." "Of course. And you'll shadow Ruby first. She runs the front when I'm busy." There it was, a flicker in her face. Just a twitch, gone almost as soon as it came. But I saw it, heard it in the slight tightening of her voice when she said, "Understood." After she left, I sat in the back room and let myself feel the weight of it. It wasn't pride. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. I hadn't said yes to prove anything to her. I'd said yes because I knew I could trust myself now, to set boundaries, to lead, to not shrink under her gaze. The woman who once laughed at my idea of starting a business would now be learning how to file receipts in my storeroom. It didn't make me smug. It made me steady. I thought about Sarah, how she used to ask me if Clara's words hurt. I'd always said no. But they had. Of course they had. And yet, here I was, years later, giving that same woman a place to land. Not because I'd forgotten, but because I'd grown past the need to stay small, just to keep others comfortable. Clara showed up that first Tuesday in slacks and a blouse so stiff it still had the fold lines from the package. She held a new notepad in one hand and a pen that probably cost more than my week's groceries. I said nothing about it. People bring armor when they're walking into unfamiliar territory. Some wear silence, others starch. Ruby greeted her politely, then went right on entering inventory like she always did. No drama, no whispering, just the same rhythm we'd built over the years. I stood at the back table finishing a hem, watching the way Clara glanced around the shop like a stranger in her own town. I showed her how we logged customer drop-offs, explained the difference between rush and ready by Friday, told her how we wrapped garments in tissue for delicate fabric and how we always include a handwritten thank you note in bridal orders. "You write these yourself?" she asked, picking one up. "I do." She nodded, but I saw it, that flicker of surprise, like she still hadn't fully made the jump from sewing hobby to real business. Ruby walked her through the register system while I took a client in the back. I could hear them through the thin wall, Ruby explaining, Clara asking questions. Her voice was different, softer, careful. After an hour, I came out and asked Clara to ring up a simple skirt hem. She hesitated with the keypad, then fumbled the drawer open. Ruby gently leaned over. "It's this button, not that one." Clara muttered a quiet thank you, cheeks flushed. The rest of the day passed without incident. I gave her a list of dates for bridal pickups, asked her to organize the tags by week, and she did it without complaint. Not fast, but carefully. At closing time, she came to the counter with her notepad. "I made some suggestions for efficiency," she said, handing me a page. "Little things, nothing major." I glanced at it. She wasn't wrong. Some of it was useful. Ideas about grouping alterations by complexity or labeling shelves for quicker access. But I didn't like the way she handed it over, like she was rescuing us from ourselves. I nodded. "I'll look it over." Clara hesitated. "Thank you again. I know this wasn't easy." I met her gaze. "I'm not in the business of making people feel small, Clara. You taught me enough about that." She blinked, then nodded. "Fair." That was the first time she'd admitted anything. Not in words, not outright. But the way her shoulders dropped when she walked out, like she wasn't holding herself up by pride anymore, told me she heard it. Ruby closed the register and looked at me. "You handled that better than I would have." "It's not about handling her," I said. "It's about not letting her handle me." By week 3, Clara had settled into a quiet rhythm. She came on time, wore more comfortable shoes, stopped carrying the expensive pen. She even laughed once at one of Ruby's sarcastic comments about customer complaints. "I had no idea brides could be this picky," Clara said, scanning a return. Wait till prom season, Ruby replied. That's when the real drama shows up. Clara chuckled, and for the first time, she didn't sound brittle. I watched them from the sewing table, my fingers moving instinctively, my mind somewhere between the needle and the door. There was a strange stillness in me that I hadn't felt in years. Not peace, exactly. Something sturdier, like I'd been holding up a wall for so long, bracing for the next insult. And now the tension had gone. I didn't trust her. Not fully. Not yet. But I didn't hate her either. I had no room left for hate. That space had been filled by other things. Quiet victories, late-night laughter, the smell of pressed cotton and lavender starch. A week later, Ruby's cousin announced she'd gotten a scholarship to study textile design in the city. I hugged her goodbye and pressed a 20 into her palm for the bus. She cried. I cried. That afternoon, Clara stayed late without being asked. She refolded fabric, wiped down the machines, swept the floor. When I thanked her, she said, "It felt good to be useful today." And for the first time, I believed her. Not because she said it right, but because, finally, it didn't sound like a performance. Clara started bringing her own lunch on Tuesdays. At first, it was neat little sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, always cut diagonally. Then it was leftovers in small containers, quiche one week, lentil soup the next. She'd sit at the corner table in the back, quietly eating, while Ruby scrolled on her phone, and I hand-stitched bridal lace under the glow of the desk lamp. It was strange, the way the silence between us had changed. It used to feel sharp, like the edge of something broken. Now it was softer, like old fabric that had been washed 100 times. One day, she brought apple cake, 3 slices, carefully wrapped in parchment. "I had some extra," she said, setting them down. I looked at the slices, then at her. "That the same recipe from your garden parties?" Her eyes flickered. "More or less." Ruby took a bite and raised an eyebrow. "This is good." Clara smiled, small but real. I took my slice back to the counter and ate it while sorting a box of buttons. It tasted like 1987 and expensive lawn chairs, like Sundays with too much sun and too little shade. By the end of that month, she was working both Tuesdays and Fridays. I didn't offer, she just showed up. "We've got more volume," she said. "Figured I'd help." I didn't argue. She was efficient now, took notes, filed tags alphabetically. When the supply order came late, she called the vendor herself and sorted it out without asking. I heard her on the phone, polite but firm. Clara Jenkins, firm. For something that wasn't her own. The day the industrial steamer broke down, she offered to pay half the repair fee. "It's not your responsibility," I said. "I know," she replied, "but I'd like to contribute. I've been getting a paycheck from here for months. Feels wrong not to invest in it." I hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." She didn't say more. A few days later, I found a new spool rack by the back window. She'd bought it herself, didn't mention it. Just left it there. One evening, we were closing up when Ruby asked, "How long have you two known each other?" Clara looked at me. I looked at her. "Too long," I said. Clara added, "and not well enough." That surprised me, and it surprised Ruby, too. She raised an eyebrow but didn't push. Later that night, after they'd both left, I stayed behind to finish some stitching. The shop was quiet, warm from the late sun. I looked around, at the pegboard filled with thread, at the photo of Sarah tucked in the corner of the mirror, at the new rack by the window. Then I sat down, folded my hands in my lap, and let the silence settle. I remembered the day Sarah came home crying after Clara told her she'd never be more than a nurse's daughter. She was 12. I held her until she fell asleep, then stayed up all night sewing a new school skirt because I couldn't fix what had been said, but I could at least make her feel neat, proud. I remembered all the times Clara's laugh had followed me like an echo, all the rooms I'd walked into where she'd already rewritten the story of who I was. And now, we shared scissors. I didn't know what to call that. Forgiveness? Maybe. Not the warm, sweeping kind from church sermons, but something more practical, more real. Like setting down a heavy box you'd been carrying for years, only to realize you didn't need what was inside anymore. That weekend, a customer came in with a torn christening gown, delicate, over 50 years old, yellowed from time. She was nervous, kept apologizing, wringing her hands. Clara stepped forward. "We'll take good care of it," she said gently. "Agnes has hands steadier than a surgeon's." The woman relaxed, smiled. Later, I asked Clara, "You meant that?" "I did." There was no ceremony, no apology, no long talks over tea. Just the slow stitching of two lives once frayed, now, maybe, edging toward repair. The day Clara didn't show up, I wasn't worried at first. Sometimes people run late. A bus misses its stop. A shoelace breaks. The sky turns the wrong kind of gray and makes a person pause at the door. I worked through the morning without thinking much of it, just folded her apron neatly on the back chair and brewed the usual pot of coffee. By lunchtime, I started to feel it. A small ache in the back of my ribs, the kind that comes when something's out of place but you can't name it yet. I sent Ruby to check Clara's address after her shift, just in case. She called me 2 hours later. "She's fine," Ruby said, but she looked tired, said she had a dizzy spell, stayed in bed. I nodded, even though Ruby couldn't see me. "All right, thank you." I hung up and sat down slowly at the sewing table. My fingers rested on the fabric, but I didn't pick up the needle. Clara Jenkins, stubborn as ever, but not invincible. That Friday, she showed up as usual, slower, a little pale, but with lipstick on and hair brushed back. She didn't mention Tuesday, just stepped behind the counter, wiped the glass, and asked what orders were due. I didn't press her. That's the thing about aging. Sometimes the body goes quiet in ways no one else sees. You learn to work around it, not through it. Pride is a hard thread to cut. But I started watching her more closely. The way she held the receipt pad with both hands now. How she sat more often, even when no one was looking. One afternoon, after closing, I handed her a paper bag with soup and crackers. "For tomorrow," I said. She looked at it, then at me. "I'm not a charity case, Agnes." "I know," I said, "but I made too much." She took it, quietly. That's how it began. This silent agreement that neither of us would name the changes, only move around them with dignity. She came in twice a week, always on time, always with a scarf tucked around her neck like armor. I let her rest when she needed to. She kept the books like a banker, balanced, precise. Then came the letter. It arrived one Tuesday morning, tucked in a stack of junk mail. No return address, just her name and mine on the envelope. I opened it after she'd gone home. Inside was one sheet of paper, handwritten. Careful cursive, neat as a grocery list. "Agnes, if I never get the chance to say this aloud, I want it written somewhere. You were right. About work. About dignity. About how a woman's worth isn't in how she's seen, but in how she stands when no one claps. I was cruel. Not because you deserved it, but because you scared me. You reminded me of something I didn't know how to be: resilient. You didn't owe me kindness, but you gave it. Whatever comes next, I hope you know I've learned more from this shop than I ever did in all those years behind Harold's counter. Thank you. Clara. I folded the letter once, carefully, and placed it inside the back of the appointment ledger. Not for keeping, just for remembering. That week, I noticed her hands trembling when she tried to thread a needle. She laughed it off. "These old fingers," she said, waving them in the air. But I saw the truth in her eyes. She was scared. Later, when Ruby went to grab us coffee, I asked gently, "Do you have someone helping at home?" She shook her head. "I manage." "You don't have to." She looked at me for a long moment. "I'll be all right." But I knew better. I've seen what aging alone can do. I lived it. You start boiling water slower, taking the stairs in halves, counting pills in silence, and no one notices until something breaks. The next day, I called Sarah. "She needs checking in on," I said. "Nothing dramatic. Just eyes." Sarah, bless her heart, drove over with groceries and sat with Clara for an hour. They'd never been close. Sarah remembered too well, but time does something strange to bitterness. It either hardens or softens. That day, it softened. She was surprised, Sarah told me later, but she let me stay. That Friday, Clara walked into the shop with a cane. Said nothing. I didn't mention it. Just moved the chair behind the counter a little closer to the register, set the receipts on the lower shelf, made room. Because sometimes dignity isn't in what you say, it's in how you adjust the table. The award letter came in a plain envelope, no gold trim or heavy paper. Just my name, typed neat, and the town seal in the corner. I almost threw it out with the flyers. Thought it was another community notice about road closures or a pancake breakfast. But something about the weight made me pause. Inside, a letter from the Westbridge Business Association. They were naming me Local Businesswoman of the Year. Small plaque, modest ceremony, free lunch at the Civic Center, and a request that I say a few words. I read it twice, then set it on the counter and kept sewing. When Ruby came in, I handed her the letter without a word. She read it, grinned. About time. Clara, seated near the window with the appointments log, looked up slowly. "They're honoring you?" I nodded. Apparently. She was quiet a moment. Then she said softly, "Good." That was all. That evening, I walked home slower than usual. Not because I was tired, though I was, but because I needed the quiet. Needed the dark tree limbs above me, the sidewalk cracks underfoot, the hush of cars passing like breath. I thought about all the years I spent trying not to be seen failing. How invisible I had made myself just to survive. And now someone wanted me to stand in front of a room and talk about it. When Sarah called, she was breathless. "Mom, that's huge. You have to go." I didn't say I wouldn't, I told her. "You'll speak?" I hesitated. "I'll speak." Clara offered to cover the shop that afternoon, said it matter-of-factly, like she was offering to check the mail. "You shouldn't miss it," she said. "You've earned it." Her tone was even. No sarcasm, no sugar, just true. The day of the event, I wore a navy blouse I'd made myself years ago. Simple, clean lines. I ironed it twice. Sarah picked me up, nervous like I was going to a school recital. "You don't have to do anything but be you," she said. "I've been me for a long time," I replied. "I think I've got it down." The Civic Center was full of folding chairs and soft voices. There were plaques on a table, pitchers of lemonade, dry sandwiches curling at the edges. People smiled. Some I knew, some I didn't. a few from church, a few from city council. They called my name last. I walked up, heart steady, steps slow. The podium was too high, the microphone too close. I adjusted both. Then I spoke. "I don't like speeches," I said. "Never have. I grew up in rooms where silence kept the peace, where speaking too much meant trouble. But today, I'm grateful. Not for the award, but for the years that led to it." A pause. No shuffling. No whispers. "I started sewing to keep the lights on. I didn't think it would become a business. I didn't think I'd ever be asked to speak in front of a crowd. But here we are. And all I want to say is this: never let someone else's laugh be the reason you stop. Some of us build things not out of ambition, but out of necessity. That doesn't make them less worthy." Soft applause. One woman wiped her eye. I stepped down, plaque in hand, and sat next to Sarah. She squeezed my arm. Later that evening, I walked into the shop alone. I placed the plaque on the shelf behind the counter, next to a jar of spare buttons. Behind it, barely visible, was Clara's letter. She came in the next morning, saw it, and paused. "They spelled your name right," she said. They did. She smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. "You were good up there," she added. "Better than the mayor." "He talked too much," I said. "Exactly." We laughed, the kind of laugh that doesn't sting, the kind that fills a room gently and then leaves space for quiet. Later, Ruby looked at the plaque and asked if we should hang it. "No," I said. "It's enough that it's here." Because I didn't need it on the wall. I didn't need to be reminded. I already knew who I was. Autumn came early that year, the kind that carries a bite, not just a breeze. Leaves began to gather in quiet corners of the sidewalk before September had fully settled, and I found myself reaching for the thicker cardigans before I was ready to let go of summer. The shop changed with the season, too. Customers came in with wool coats needing new linings, trousers that needed letting out, dresses made for warmer months that no longer fit quite right. Every year brought the same rhythm: clothes that no longer matched the bodies they belonged to. People adjusting, people preparing. Clara started wearing gloves, not the elegant kind she used to wear to church, but soft cotton ones, plain and sensible. I noticed the way her fingers moved slower now when she counted change or clipped receipts. She didn't complain. She never mentioned pain. But I knew. One Tuesday, I walked in to find the register already balanced and the front shelves reorganized. "You came early," I said. She nodded. I couldn't sleep. She didn't offer more, and I didn't press. We worked in silence most of the morning, but the kind of silence that's comfortable, familiar. The kind that only comes when two people have already said the things that matter. Ruby had the day off. It was just us. Around midday, a woman came in with an old coat wrapped in a dry cleaning bag. Said it belonged to her father. "He passed last year," she explained, eyes down. "I wanted to keep something, but it doesn't fit." I took it gently. Heavy wool, moth-bitten near the cuff. The lining was torn, but the shoulders were clean and strong. "We can fix this," I said. "Take it in, reinforce the seams. Make it yours." She nodded, relieved. "Thank you." After she left, Clara ran her hand along the coat, careful not to snag the fabric. "Funny, isn't it? How much we hold on to through clothes." I looked at her. Not funny, just true. That afternoon, she asked if we still had the form she'd filled out when she applied. "Probably," I said. "Somewhere in the old folder." She nodded. "I'd like to see it." I brought it out from the filing cabinet. It was neat, as I remembered. Everything typed. No crossed-out lines. She read it over for a long time, then folded it back up and slid it into her handbag. "I didn't think I'd last here," she said. "Neither did I admitted. She smiled at that. But here we are. We sat quietly after that. The wind pushed against the windows like it was trying to come in, but the room stayed warm. As we were locking up, she paused at the door. "I had a dream last night," she said. "Harold was there, younger, standing in the old shop. He looked confused, like he didn't know where anything went. I told him I was working with you now, and he just nodded. That's all." She didn't wait for a response. Just pulled her scarf tighter and stepped into the wind. I stood in the doorway and watched her go, her cane tapping lightly on the sidewalk, one step at a time. That evening, I sat by the window at home, tea cooling beside me, hands still sore from a day of stitching. I thought about the long road that led us here. Not just me, not just Clara. All the women like us, too often underestimated, too often overlooked, who weren't loud, but endured, who were told no, but kept going anyway. I looked around my little kitchen. Same one I used to cry in over unpaid bills, the same table where I first laid out patterns for aprons and skirts. It hadn't changed much, but I had. The shop was still modest. No website, no fancy signage. Just word of mouth and work done right. But it was enough. More than enough. And now I wasn't doing it alone. We started closing the shop an hour earlier in October. The light faded faster, and the chill came through the front window no matter how tightly we shut it. Clara's steps had slowed again, her cane a steady rhythm on the old wood floor, and I didn't see the point in pretending we were still 25. Customers adjusted without complaint. They always did. There's a certain grace in working with your hands. It invites patience, not urgency. People don't rush through something that matters. One Friday afternoon, I found Clara sitting at the front desk after closing, hands resting quietly in her lap, her coat unbuttoned, but not yet on. She looked tired. Not just in the bones, but in the way people look when they've finished something that took more from them than they expected. "I think I'll step back a little," she said, not looking at me. "Maybe just Fridays. Or not at all, if that's easier." I didn't answer right away. Just sat beside her and watched the traffic outside. The bakery across the street was closing up. Lights dimmed. Shadows moved inside like slow dancers. "You don't have to explain," I said. "I know." We sat in silence for a while longer. The kind that doesn't ask for filling. Then she added, "I thought this place would feel temporary, like something I'd pass through, but it didn't." "I didn't think you'd stay," I said. She smiled faintly. "Neither did I." She left early that day, said her knees were acting up. I didn't stop her, just helped her with her scarf and watched as she moved carefully down the steps. She waved once before rounding the corner. After she left, I walked slowly through the shop, touched each table, each surface, each thing we'd built. The new rack by the door, the shelf she organized by thread color, the small jar she'd started filling with odd buttons she found too pretty to toss. "Someday someone will want one of these," she'd said. I hadn't argued. That weekend, I found the thank you note she'd written after the award ceremony, tucked under the register drawer. Folded neatly, no envelope. Just a few lines in her slanted hand. "Agnes, for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Not for proving me wrong, but for proving yourself right. Clara." I didn't cry. I just placed it behind the frame that held Sarah's old school photo. The next Friday, Clara didn't come in. She didn't call either. I waited until noon, then rang her number. No answer. By 3, Ruby was at her door with a grocery bag, knocking softly. She found Clara asleep in her chair, book open in her lap, glasses sliding down her nose. She was fine, just tired, more than usual. When she came back the following week, she moved slower, but her smile was easier. "Don't make a fuss," she said. "I've had enough fuss for a lifetime." I nodded. Then no fuss. That Friday was her last day behind the counter. She didn't say it outright, but we both knew. She came in, organized the drawers, wiped down the register, and drank her tea slowly. At 4 o'clock, she stood, straightened the sleeves of her cardigan, and said, "You've got it from here." I didn't argue. Didn't offer more shifts. Didn't insist she stay. Just walked her to the door, helped her down the step, and said, "Take care, Clara." She squeezed my hand. "I'll come by. I'll be around." And I knew she would. Not every day. Not to work. But she'd come. Because something had settled between us. Something real. Not quite friendship. Not quite forgiveness. But something sturdy. Like the stitching in a well-made seam, hidden from view, but strong enough to hold. Winter came in quietly that year. No early storm, no dramatic cold snap. Just a slow, creeping stillness that slipped into the corners of things. The kind of season that makes you walk slower, speak softer, double-check the lock before you go to bed. Business was steady. Enough to keep the lights on. Enough to keep my hands moving. Ruby had grown into the rhythm of the shop without needing me to look over her shoulder. She managed orders, called vendors, trained a part-timer from the local college who had never held a needle before, but had good instincts and warm eyes. Most days, I stayed at the back table, where the light was best. My body didn't bend like it used to, but my fingers still remembered every trick, every shortcut, every stitch that could save a garment from being tossed. Clara came by once in December, wore a coat too thin for the wind, said she didn't mind the cold. "I used to hate this time of year," she said, warming her hands on a mug of tea. "All that forced cheer. All those perfect houses with their perfect trees. And now," she shrugged, "now I just notice who's still here." We sat in the back room while the new girl helped a customer up front. Clara didn't ask about the business, didn't offer tips. She just sat, drank, looked around. "It's strange," she said, "being somewhere and knowing it doesn't need you anymore." I turned to her. "Need is overrated. You were wanted." She didn't speak for a while after that. Just folded the edge of her napkin into a neat little triangle, over and over. Before she left, she paused near the mirror by the door, smoothed her scarf, studied her reflection. "Do I look older?" "Yes," I said. "So do I." She smiled faintly. "Good." The holidays passed quietly. No big orders, a few last-minute dress fixes, a handful of returns. On Christmas Eve, Sarah came by with cookies and hugged me for longer than usual. She didn't say much, just held on. I held her back. That night, I sat by the window, same as I had for so many years, and let the silence settle around me. No sadness, no regret, just stillness. A few days later, I received a letter, postmarked local. No name on the envelope. Inside was a card, blank except for one sentence. "Thank you for making space for someone like me." No signature, but I knew. It stayed on my desk for a week before I tucked it inside the drawer, next to Clara's old application form and the crumpled flyer from the first week I opened shop. Time had softened everything. The old pain, the sharp edges, even the memory of her laughter that once followed me like a shadow. Now it felt distant, like a story someone else had told me long ago. One afternoon in late January, Ruby found an old box in the supply closet. Inside were scraps of fabric, half-finished mending, buttons in mismatched pairs. "This from the early days?" she asked. I nodded. "Before receipts, before rent." She held up a patch of faded denim, threadbare in the middle. "You kept it?" "I keep a lot of things." She smiled. "You gonna do something with them?" "Maybe," I said. "Maybe not." That weekend, I sat at home with those scraps spread out on the table. Each one carried a memory. Someone's jacket, someone's dress, someone's story stitched into the seams. I ran my hands over them slowly, without rush. Clara was never just one thing. None of us are. She was bitter and proud, and sometimes she was small in the ways that hurt people. But she also showed up. She learned. She softened, even if she never called it that. And in the end, she sat beside me in silence. That mattered. The shop no longer needed to be proof. I wasn't fighting anymore, not to be seen, not to be respected. I had built something solid, quiet, lasting, one stitch at a time. It was a Thursday in early spring when a young woman came into the shop holding a dress wrapped in plastic and an expression that told me everything before she spoke. "It's my mother's," she said. "I want to wear it for my wedding, but I'm not sure if it can be saved." I took the bundle gently, unwrapped it slowly. The dress was beautiful once, ivory silk, hand-stitched pleats, lace around the collar yellowed by time. The zipper was rusted, one sleeve torn. "We can save it," I said. Her shoulders dropped with relief. "I'm so glad I found this place. Everyone said you were the one to go to." That made me pause. Not the compliment, but the word. Everyone. Because somewhere along the way, I'd stopped noticing how far the circle had grown. It used to be just neighbors, then friends of friends, then people from the next town over. Now it was brides, teachers, nurses, people I'd never met who walked in carrying stories in garment bags. I called Ruby over to help pin the dress. She nodded respectfully, understood the stakes. I watched the two of them work together, one young, one steady, both careful. And I realized this place would go on even if I stepped back. That afternoon, I sat at my sewing table, tea cooling beside me, needle paused above a hemline. Outside, the trees had started to bud. The light was longer now, the kind that stretches just enough to make you believe in another season. The bell rang. I looked up, and there she was. Clara, not in a coat, not in work shoes, just herself. A little smaller than before, slower in step, but still carrying that same quiet posture she'd never fully lost. "I thought I'd stop by," she said. "You're always welcome." She looked around. "It's quieter now." "Fridays tend to be." She nodded. "It's still beautiful." She didn't stay long, just sat for a while, drank half a cup of tea, then stood with a small sigh. "I'll be moving soon," she said. "Sarah mentioned she found me a place. Smaller, closer to the clinic." I nodded. "That's good." "I'll miss this," she added, almost to herself. "This room, this rhythm." "You'll be all right." She smiled, soft and true. "I know." When she left, she didn't linger. No speeches, no goodbyes, just a hand on my shoulder, warm and brief. After the door shut behind her, I sat a while longer, thought about all we'd walked through, Not just her and me, but all of us. The women who were overlooked, the ones told to stay quiet, the ones who made something out of nothing, who built businesses from broken zippers, reputations from clean stitches, lives from persistence. There was no parade, no final confrontation, just quiet resolution. Just two women who once stood on opposite sides of the same sidewalk and now, years later, had learned to walk beside one another. That night, I closed the shop early, locked the door, shut off the lights, and stood a moment by the front window. Outside, the wind was soft. The town moved gently, like it always had. I placed the closed sign in the window. Not forever, just for now. And as I turned to go, I felt it, not pride, not triumph, but something deeper, peace. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own quiet strength or someone who deserves to be seen, share it, leave a comment, let someone know. Because stories like these, they're stitched into all of us.